The heart monitor didn't beep. It screamed. One long flat tone cut through the noise of Callaway Regional Medical Center's emergency ward like a blade, and nobody moved. Not the attending physician standing 6 feet away. Not the charge nurse frozen at her station. Not the 2 residents who suddenly found something fascinating on their clipboards. Megan Pruitt moved. She was already at the bedside before the alarm finished its first second, her hands finding the patient's wrist, her eyes reading the monitor, her brain 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. The man on the bed, 50s, construction type, brought in 30 minutes ago with chest pain, had gone gray, not pale. Gray. "He's in V-fib," she said. "I need the crash cart, now." Nobody answered her because at that exact moment the emergency ward doors swung open and Harrison Voss walked in. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now because this story is going to take you somewhere you did not see coming. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this one travels. Harrison Voss was not a doctor. He was not a nurse, not a paramedic, not anyone who had ever saved a single life inside these walls. He was the chief executive officer of Callaway Regional, and he moved through the hospital the way men like him always move. Like the building existed to frame him rather than to heal people. He was 53, silver-haired, dressed in a suit that cost more than most of his nursing staff made in a month. He had the kind of face that photographed well for donor galas and board meeting announcements, smooth and confident and calibrated for trust. Behind that face was a man who had not set foot in the emergency ward in 4 months. Not until today, not until the Hargrove family had arrived. The Hargroves were old Colorado money. Timber, then real estate, then healthcare investment. Donations to Callaway Regional totaling just under $3 million over the past 6 years. And Randall Hargrove III, age 31, had walked in 20 minutes ago with a bruised knee from a ski trip, demanding immediate attention and a private consultation suite. He was currently sitting in triage, visibly irritated, and his father had called Voss directly. Voss scanned the ward, found what he was looking for, and walked toward it with the particular stride of someone who had never once been told no and expected that record to remain intact. What he found was Megan Pruitt, on her knees beside a crash cart, attaching leads with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times in worse conditions than this. The patient's monitor had shifted, not resolved, shifted, and she was calling out numbers to a second nurse who had finally arrived and was copying them down with slightly shaking hands. "Pruitt." Megan didn't look up. "Give me 30 seconds. I need you in Suite C, the Hargrove consultation. I'm in the middle of a resuscitation." The ward went quiet in a specific way, the way it does when everyone in the room understands that something is happening that has nothing to do with medicine. Voss stopped walking. His jaw tightened. "Dr. Fasulo can handle this patient. Dr. Fasulo is in surgery." She still hadn't looked at him. Her hands were steady. The patient's color was slightly less gray. Charges in the break room, Kowalski's on a trauma on the 2nd floor, and the 2 residents standing over there haven't run a code without supervision since their 2nd week. The 2 residents looked at their clipboards again. "Then we'll find someone," Voss said, and there was a new quality in his voice now. The one that had ended other careers in this building. Quiet, deliberate, a door closing. "What I need right now is for you to step away from this patient and attend to a priority consultation in Suite C." Megan finally looked up. She was 33 years old. Medium height, brown hair pulled back in a way that suggested function over anything else. No jewelry, no makeup, the kind of face that didn't register immediately in a crowded room. She had been at Callaway Regional for 14 months as a contract nurse, the designation that meant no benefits, no seniority, no seat at any table that mattered. She was technically temporary. She was technically replaceable. She looked at Harrison Voss for exactly 2 seconds. "No," she said. The word landed like a stone into still water. "Excuse me? This patient is in ventricular fibrillation. I'm not walking away from him." She turned back to the monitor. "If you want to file something, do it after." Voss stood very still. Then he said, very quietly, "You understand what you're doing." "I understand exactly what I'm doing." "You're a contract employee, Pruitt. You don't have the protection of—" "I know what I am." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Do you want to keep talking, or do you want me to do my job? The second nurse, a younger woman named Ortega, who had been at Callaway for 3 years and had never once spoken back to administration, looked like she was watching something she would think about for a long time afterward. Voss did not leave. He stood there for a moment longer than was comfortable, and then he turned and walked out of the ward in the direction of Suite C, and the way he moved was different now. Tighter, colder, the walk of a man composing a decision. Megan's hands did not shake. She completed the protocol. She called the rhythm change before the monitor confirmed it. She directed Ortega through each step with a specificity that was almost unsettling, not because it was aggressive, but because it was so precise, so unhesitating, as if she had a map of the situation that nobody else in the room could see. 11 minutes later, the patient's monitor showed a sinus rhythm. Not perfect, but alive. Megan stepped back, stripped her gloves, checked the patient's chart one more time. She wrote 3 lines of notes in handwriting that was small and exact. Then she washed her hands at the sink, dried them, and stood at the counter for a moment with her eyes on the window. Ortega was watching her. "That was," she started. "Make sure he gets a cardiology consult within the hour," Megan said. "Not a resident, an attending." "Right. Yeah, absolutely." Ortega paused. "Are you okay?" Megan looked at her. "I'm fine." She was not particularly fine, but that was not something she was going to put in this room. Callaway Regional Medical Center sat in the northern edge of Delwood, Colorado, a mid-sized city that had grown fast in the past decade. Tech money and outdoor recreation pulling in new residents every year, new construction going up alongside old neighborhoods that hadn't changed much since the 90s. The hospital had grown with the city, expanded twice, added a trauma center, added a children's wing, added a helipad that cost twice what anyone had projected. It was, on paper, an excellent hospital, ranked in the top 15% of regional medical centers in the state. The kind of place that sent press releases about patient outcomes and staff excellence and community investment. What the press releases did not mention was the internal architecture of who mattered and who didn't. A system as clearly defined as any org chart, invisible to patients and visitors but immediately legible to anyone who worked inside it. At the top, Voss and his executive team. Below them, the senior physicians, the department heads, the people with long contracts and institutional memory and golf relationships that went back years. Below them, the staff nurses, the techs, the people who kept the building actually running. And at the bottom, technically not even on the ladder, the contract workers, the temporary people, the ones who could be ended with a phone call and a 2-week notice. Megan had understood her position from day one. She had taken the contract because it was available and because Delwood was where she had landed and she needed work, and she had done her job without asking for anything beyond that. She kept her head down. She did not make friends easily. She arrived on time, completed her shifts, and went home to a 1-bedroom apartment 12 minutes from the hospital, where she lived alone with a second-hand couch and more books than furniture. She did not talk about herself. Nobody here knew much about her except that she was good at her job. Very good, in the particular way that drew attention without seeking it, the kind of competence that made senior nurses occasionally pause and watch her work, and then say nothing because they couldn't quite articulate what it was they were seeing. She had been in Delwood for 14 months. She had been a nurse in one form or another for 9 years. Before that was a different life, and she kept that life in a box that she did not open. The summons came 2 hours after the incident in the ward. Not a conversation, not a meeting request. A note, delivered by a front desk administrator who could not quite meet Megan's eyes, that said she was to report to Mr. Voss's office at 3 p.m. The administrator handed it over and left quickly, as if proximity might be dangerous. Megan read the note, folded it, and put it in her scrub pocket. At 2:58, she took the elevator to the 4th floor. Voss's office was at the end of a carpeted corridor that felt like a different building from the floors below. Quieter, warmer, the kind of institutional space designed to communicate authority through materials. Dark wood paneling, framed photographs of ribbon cuttings and donation ceremonies. The distant sounds of the hospital reduced to nothing. His assistant, a thin man named Greaves, told her to go in. Voss was at his desk, Beside him stood a woman Megan recognized as Paula Marsh, the Director of Human Resources, early 50s, precise, the kind of administrator who had perfected the delivery of bad news to the point where it sounded almost like good news. Beside Marsh was a man Megan didn't know, younger, with a legal pad and the specific blankness of someone there to document. "Sit down, Pruitt," Voss said. She sat. "I'll keep this brief." He folded his hands on the desk. "We're terminating your contract effective immediately. Your access card will be deactivated at the end of this meeting. Security will escort you to collect your personal items." Megan looked at him. "The incident in the emergency ward this morning demonstrated a pattern of insubordination that is incompatible with our institutional culture," Marsh said, reading from a paper that had clearly been prepared before Megan arrived. "We've also identified concerns about your professional conduct on 3 prior occasions documented in your file." "What 3 occasions?" Megan asked. "The notes are in your file." "I've never been written up." "The documentation exists," Marsh said, and her voice did not change at all. Megan looked at the man with the legal pad. He was writing. She looked back at Voss. "The patient I was treating this morning had a cardiac event," she said. "He's alive." Dr. Fasulo reviewed the case afterward and indicated the situation was manageable without your involvement. Dr. Fasulo was in surgery. "He's reviewed it since." The silence in the room had a texture to it. "There were no residents with adequate experience to run that code unsupervised," Megan said. Her voice was level, not pleading, not angry, just precise. "I made a clinical judgment. The patient survived. You disobeyed a direct instruction from the chief executive of this institution," Voss said, and now the controlled quality was gone from his voice, just slightly, just enough to see what was underneath it. "In front of staff, in front of 2 residents who are still in their formative period with this institution. What you did was not heroism, Miss Pruitt. It was insubordination, and it will not be treated as anything else." Megan sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." Voss blinked. "Okay?" "I heard you." She stood up. "I'll get my things." It was not the response he had prepared for. She could see it. The brief recalibration behind his eyes, the expectation of argument or tears or the kind of scene that could be used against her. She gave him none of it. Paula Marsh walked her to the locker room. The security officer, a heavy-set man named Denny, who had always been decent to the nursing staff and currently looked deeply uncomfortable, waited in the hallway. Megan opened her locker, removed a canvas bag, and put into it a spare pair of shoes, a dog-eared paperback, a granola bar, and a small zippered case. She closed the locker. She thought about the patient on the second floor with the new sinus rhythm. She thought about the cardiology consult she had requested and whether Ortega would follow through. She put the canvas bag over her shoulder and walked out. The main lobby of Callaway Regional was large and designed to feel welcoming. High ceilings, natural light through tall windows, a coffee kiosk to the left, seating areas arranged around a central information desk. At mid-afternoon on a Thursday, it was moderately busy. Family members of patients moving between the elevators and the exit, a group of medical students crossing toward the East Wing, an older woman at the information desk asking something the volunteer was trying patiently to understand. Megan walked through it with her bag and her access card, useless now, in her hand, and she was almost at the door when she heard it. Not a sound. Or not exactly. More like a shift in the room's atmosphere, the kind of thing you feel before you can identify it. She stopped. In the far corner of the lobby, away from the main foot traffic, a man sat in one of the armchairs with his leg extended and a set of crutches propped against the wall beside him. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, broad across the shoulders, wearing civilian clothes that didn't quite obscure the way he carried himself. The upright posture, the stillness, the quality of attention that some people never entirely lose. He had a jaw like something carved rather than grown, and the kind of eyes that registered everything in a room without moving. At his feet, on a service vest, lay a German shepherd. The dog had been still. Megan had noticed it in the way she noticed everything when she entered a space, cataloged and filed. It had been still for the entire time she'd been crossing the lobby. It was not still now. The dog was standing, its head up, Its attention locked on Megan with an intensity that was almost physical. She felt it before she understood it. A cold thing at the base of her spine, old and familiar, the specific sensation of being identified. The dog didn't bark, didn't move toward her. It stood there with its amber eyes fixed on her, and its whole posture changed, the way a military dog's posture changes when it finds what it was trained to find. The man in the chair had looked up. He was looking at her bag. Megan looked down. The canvas bag hung from her shoulder, and from the side pocket, caught by a clip she had attached years ago and never removed because it was habit, because it had been there so long it was almost invisible. A worn military challenge coin hung on a short chain. Dull bronze, edges smoothed by handling, the face worn but still showing the unit insignia. She had not thought about it in months. It was just there, the way a scar is just there. The man's face had changed. He was on his feet now, one hand on the armrest, the crutches ignored, standing with the particular controlled urgency of someone who had just seen something they had not expected to see and was working very hard to appear calm about it. "Excuse me," he said. His voice carried across the lobby with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard without raising their volume. Megan stopped. She should have kept walking. She knew she should have kept walking, but the dog was still locked on her. Not threatening, not aggressive, just absolutely certain. And the man's expression was doing something complicated that she recognized without being able to name. "That coin," he said when she turned. She looked at it, then at him. "Where did you get it?" he asked. "It's mine," she said. He took a step toward her, the legs slowing him but not stopping him, and she saw now the set of his shoulders more clearly, the way old injuries had settled into the architecture of his body, the particular way he moved, compensating without appearing to compensate. "That's an Echo 9 coin," he said. The lobby went about its business around them. The coffee kiosk, the information desk, footsteps on the polished floor. Megan's hand had moved to the coin without her deciding to move it, covering it, or nearly. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. The man, she didn't know his name yet, didn't know anything about him except what she was reading off his body and his eyes, and the way his voice had dropped when he said those two words, looked at her with an expression that was not quite disbelief. "Those coins were issued to 12 people," he said. "I know where 10 of them are. One is dead." His voice stayed even. "That leaves one unaccounted for." She said nothing. "The medic," he said. "They called her Ghost." The word landed in the lobby and disappeared into the ambient sound and the footsteps and the ordinary afternoon, and Megan stood there with her hand on the coin and her bag over her shoulder and her access card useless in her other hand, and something she had kept in a box for a long time moved against its lid. "I think you have the wrong person," she said. She said it, and she turned and she walked toward the exit, and she pushed through the glass doors into the afternoon air, and the cold hit her face, and she kept walking. And she did not run, because running was something she had stopped doing a long time ago. Behind her, through the glass, she could see the man still standing. His dog had turned to watch her go. She was halfway across the parking lot when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Ortega. She answered it. "Pruitt?" Ortega's voice was tight. I know what happened, and I'm sorry, I didn't... Listen, I need to tell you something. The cardiology consult. I put in the order, yes, Fasolo signed off on it. That's not... Ortega stopped. Megan could hear background noise. The ward. "There's a patient on the 3rd floor. Kowalski's patient. Transferred in from the trauma bay 40 minutes ago. Gunshot wound to the abdomen. They got him stable, but something changed. His pressure's dropping, and Fasulo says it's within expected parameters, and Kowalski's still tied up with the other trauma, and the resident on the case is..." She stopped again. "How fast is it dropping?" Megan asked. 20 points in the last 12 minutes. "What does the resident say?" "He's waiting for Fasulo to come back up." "How long ago did he page Fasulo?" 18 minutes. Megan had stopped walking. She was standing in the parking lot with the cold on her face and her useless access card in her hand. "Ortega," she said. "Yeah. I don't work there anymore." The silence on the phone had a shape to it. "I know," Ortega said. Megan stood there. The afternoon was clear and cold, and the mountains were visible to the west, white-capped, massive, indifferent. A car pulled out of the lot behind her. Someone's phone played a few notes of a ringtone and then stopped. She thought about the patient on the third floor. She thought about a blood pressure dropping 20 points in 12 minutes. She thought about a resident waiting for an attending who hadn't answered a page in 18 minutes. She thought about a lot of other things that she didn't think in words. She turned around. The glass doors of Callaway Regional slid open as she walked back through them. The lobby security guard, not Denny, a different one, younger, looked up from his desk. "Ma'am, I need a staff escort to the third floor," Megan said. "Or you can call ahead and tell them I'm coming. One or the other." "You're not. We received notification that your access." "There's a patient on the third floor with a dropping blood pressure and an unresponsive attending," she said, and her voice was the same voice she'd used in the emergency ward that morning. Not loud, not dramatic, just absolutely specific. "Call it up there. Tell them I'm on my way. If you want to have me removed after, that's fine." The security guard looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. She was already moving toward the elevator. She did not look back at the corner of the lobby where the man and his dog were standing, but she knew they were watching her. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. The numbers climbed. On the third floor, a patient's blood pressure was dropping, and somewhere in the lobby below, a man who knew a name she hadn't used in years was standing very still, with his eyes on the elevator indicator and an expression on his face that was something between disbelief and recognition, and something that might, in different circumstances, have been called relief. His dog sat down. It did not look away from the elevator doors. The elevator doors opened on 3, and Megan was already moving before they finished parting. The third floor of Callaway Regional was a step removed from the controlled chaos of the emergency ward below. A post-surgical recovery and trauma stabilization unit, quieter in the way that hospitals are quiet when the acute crisis has passed and the slower, more uncertain work of staying alive has begun. The lighting was different up here, warmer, the hallway lined with rooms that had curtained windows and the steady background chorus of monitors and ventilators doing their patient mechanical work. She read the unit in 3 seconds. A nursing station to her left with 2 staff members visible, both focused on their screens. A resident she didn't recognize, young, male, the specific posture of someone trying to look in control while actively falling apart, standing outside a room at the end of the hall. And through the glass panel of that room, a patient, male, dark-haired, mid-30s, the patchwork of a trauma case, bandaging across the abdomen, multiple lines, the elevated head of the bed, and a monitor above him that was currently displaying a blood pressure that made the back of Megan's neck tighten. 84/51. 12 minutes ago, Ortega had said it was 20 points lower than it had been. That meant it had been over 100 when Kowalski left. That meant it had been dropping steadily and the drop had not stopped. The resident saw her coming, and his expression cycled through about 4 things in quick succession: recognition, confusion, relief, and then the specific anxiety of someone who wasn't sure whether to accept help or defend their territory. "Pruitt, you're not—" "What's his output?" she asked. "Foley shows low, but—" Fasulo said, "How low?" The resident checked his paper. 30. Last hour. 30 milliliters. Less than a tablespoon every 5 minutes. She went into the room. The patient's name on the board was Delgado, Marcus. 34 years old, GSW to the right lower quadrant, surgical repair completed 2 hours and 20 minutes ago. The chart on the bedside tablet showed the trajectory clearly. Blood pressure declining in a slope that was gradual enough to read as stable if you weren't paying attention, and fatal if you were. "When did his abdomen start looking like that?" Megan asked. The resident looked at the patient's midsection. The bandaging was in place, but even under it the shape was wrong, slightly distended in a way that hadn't been documented in the post-op notes. "Did you examine him in the last 30 minutes?" "I was waiting for Fasulo sem—" "Did you examine him?" "No." She palpated the abdomen with her gloved hands. Light touch, working from the periphery, reading the tension under the skin. The patient stirred, made a sound. "Hey," she said to Delgado. "Marcus, I'm going to press here. Tell me if it hurts more on one side." He was conscious enough to answer. Right, he said. Right side. She straightened. He's bleeding internally. The repair is leaking or there's a secondary vessel they didn't catch. The resident stared at her. Fasolo said his pressure was within. His pressure is 84/51, and his urine output is 30 mils an hour, and his abdomen is distended on the surgical side. She was already at the tablet, pulling up the surgical notes, scanning them with the speed of someone who reads these not as narrative, but as data. Page the on-call surgeon, not Fasulo, the on-call surgical attending. That's Dr. Fasulo. Then page the backup. Who's the trauma backup tonight? Dr. Wen. Page Wen, right now. The resident looked at her with the expression of someone standing at a fork in a road in the dark. Then he pulled out his phone. Megan moved to the patient's IV lines and began checking them with systematic hands. One of the drip rates was off. Not drastically, but enough. She adjusted it, watching the monitor. Called out to the nurse who had appeared in the doorway, a heavy-set woman she didn't know by name, who looked at her with the specific wariness of someone uncertain about chain of command. I need a stat blood draw, Megan said. CBC, BMP, coags, and get me 2 units of packed red cells on standby. You're not authorized to... The patient's pressure is dropping and he's bleeding somewhere. The blood draw takes 45 seconds and it's already going to take 20 minutes to get results. She met the nurse's eyes. You can sort out the paperwork after. The nurse looked at her for 2 seconds. Then she went to get the draw kit. This was the thing about competence. People recognized it even when they didn't want to, even when it complicated things. There was a frequency to it, the way someone moved when they knew exactly what they were doing. And other medical people, regardless of hierarchy, regardless of the politics of the room, could feel it. The resident was still on his phone. Megan stood at Delgado's bedside and monitored his pressure for the next 3 minutes and watched it tick down 2 more points and held that information in her hands and thought about the trajectory. Dr. Patricia Wen arrived 12 minutes later at a half-run, still in her street clothes with a hospital badge clipped to her jacket. She'd been in the building for a different patient, and the page had caught her on the way out. She was 50, compact, with close-cropped hair and the direct manner of someone who had spent 30 years not wasting time. She took one look at the monitor, one look at the patient, and said, "Who did the blood draw?" "I did," Megan said. Wen turned, looked at her badge, or rather, at the absence of an active badge, the old one clipped to her scrub top, but with the deactivated marker visible to anyone who knew what they were looking at. "You're Pruitt," Wen said. "Yes." "Voss terminated your contract today." "Yes." A pause of about 1 second. "What's your read?" "Intra-abdominal bleed, possible leak at the repair site or missed vessel. Output 30 mils last hour. Pressure down 16 points since post-op notes. Abdomen's distended right-sided." Wen palpated the abdomen herself, her movements quick and authoritative. Then she straightened and looked at the resident, who was standing very still near the door. "Get me an OR. Tell them it's a re-exploration." She turned to the nurse. "Did you get the type and cross?" "Just came back," the nurse said. "He's B positive. 2 units on the way up." "Make it 4. Wen picked up the tablet, scanned the chart, and then looked at Megan again with an expression that had several layers to it. "Good catch." Megan said nothing. "You should go," Wen said, not unkindly. "You shouldn't be up here." "I know." She went. The elevator down was slower than the elevator up. That was probably not true in any measurable sense, but it felt true. The way things feel after adrenaline has made all your blood move too fast and then starts to subside. She stood in the elevator and looked at the floor numbers descending and thought about nothing in particular, which was the skill she had worked hardest to acquire over the years and still had not entirely mastered. The lobby again. She came off the elevator and turned toward the main exit and almost made it. "Miss Pruitt." The voice came from the corner of the lobby, and she stopped because it was addressed to her specifically. Not "hey" or "excuse me," but her name, which meant he'd found it out in the time she'd been upstairs. She wasn't sure if that unsettled her or not. The man was still there. Of course he was still there. The crutches were under his arms now, and he was standing with an ease that said the crutches were recent rather than permanent, and his dog was at his left side, still watching her with those steady amber eyes. She could have kept walking. She considered it. She walked over instead. He was taller than she'd estimated from across the room. The kind of build that comes from a specific type of physical training, functional rather than aesthetic, built for endurance and controlled force rather than appearance. The civilian clothes, dark pants, a fleece jacket, fit like an afterthought. His face up close was more weathered than it appeared from a distance, lines around his eyes that were equal parts age and squinting in outdoor light for years on end. "How'd you find my name?" she asked. "Front desk?" He paused. The administrator I spoke to was more forthcoming than she probably should have been. I think she was upset about what happened this morning. People talk. And in hospitals, people talk constantly. He shifted his weight. "I'm Nolan Graves." She didn't extend her hand, neither did he. That small exchange of information and acknowledgement that this wasn't a social situation. "You know that name," he said. She did. She wouldn't have in the abstract. Nolan Graves was not famous, was not the kind of person whose name appeared in searchable records. But she knew it the way you know a name you were never supposed to forget and spent years trying not to think about. He had been a commander in a unit that interfaced with Echo 9 on 2 operations. She had never met him face to face. She had met the results of his planning, which was a different thing. "What do you want?" she said. "To talk." "About what?" He glanced at the coin still hanging from her bag. "About the fact that you're the only confirmed survivor of Echo 9's final operation that no one has been able to locate for 6 years. The lobby continued its afternoon business around them. A family came in through the main doors, a child leading the way toward the elevator. The coffee kiosk let out a burst of steam. Somewhere above them, Marcus Delgado was being prepped for emergency surgery. "I'm not a survivor of anything," Megan said. "I'm a nurse." "You were a nurse before, and during. That's the whole point." She looked at him. He looked back. The dog had not moved. "What's his name?" she asked, indicating the dog. Graves blinked, apparently recalibrating. "Rook." "What branch?" "Army first. Transferred to Navy support program 3 years ago. He's been with me since before the—" He stopped, indicated his leg with a brief downward glance. "Since before." Rook was still watching her with that absolute attention. Military dogs, trained dogs, picked up on things that their handlers didn't always consciously register. Whatever Rook was picking up from her, it was something the dog had been trained to recognize as significant. "Why are you at Callaway?" she asked. "Consulting for a VA reform initiative. 3 days in Delwood." He paused. "I didn't come here looking for you. I didn't know you were here." He said the second part the way someone says something they want to make sure lands clearly. "Rook found you. Dogs don't—" "He was trained by a program that worked alongside Echo 9 for 2 years, Graves said. "He knows the specific scent profile that gets associated with extended combat medical environments. High cortisol, specific chemical compounds from certain field dressings, trace elements from—" He stopped himself. He knows what he knows. I've never seen him respond to a civilian before. Megan looked at Rook for a long moment. The dog's tail moved once, slow, and then stopped. She looked at her watch. "I don't have anywhere to be. That's a new development." She said it flatly, without self-pity. "But I'm not going to stand in a hospital lobby and have this conversation." "There's a coffee place 2 blocks north," Graves said. "Lugar's. Do you know it? I'll meet you there in 10 minutes. She walked out. This time she made it to the parking lot, and she stood by her car for a moment in the cold air and breathed, and the mountains were still there to the west, white and absolute and completely indifferent, and she put her bag in the passenger seat and got in and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. Then she drove 2 blocks north to Lugar's. Lugar's was a small place, warm inside, the kind of coffee shop that had been there long enough to develop its own atmosphere. Worn wooden tables, local art on the walls, the particular smell of a place that had made a lot of coffee over a long time. It was quiet at mid-afternoon, 2 people on laptops near the window, a couple in the back corner. Nobody paying attention to the door. Graves was already there when she arrived. He must have moved faster on the crutches than she'd given him credit for, or taken a cab. He was at a corner table with 2 coffees already on it. Rook was under the table, his head resting on his front paws. She sat down across from him, looked at the coffee, didn't touch it yet. "Talk," she said. He wrapped both hands around his cup and looked at her in a way that was measured and direct without being aggressive. 6 years ago, an operation designated Kestrel Fall was removed from active records and classified at a level that means most people who worked on it don't even know the classification exists. He paused. 3 of the 12 people on Echo 9 are confirmed dead. 6 are in tracked positions. Military, federal, private contractor. 2 went off-grid by choice. 1, he stopped. 1 died in a way that was listed as accident but wasn't. She picked up the coffee. It was black and hot, and she drank some of it. "There's been a review," he said. "Not an investigation, a review. Initiated 18 months ago by someone in the defense intelligence community who is not happy with how Kestrel Fall was classified and why." "Why wasn't it?" "Because the classification was requested by a senior official who had a personal interest in certain aspects of that operation not becoming publicly known." He said it carefully, neutrally, the way you say something that is true and also politically loaded. "The review has been quiet. It is not quiet anymore." Megan set down her coffee. "What changed?" "A congressional subcommittee started asking questions about black program expenditure in a specific fiscal year. They weren't looking for Kestrel Fall specifically, but the paper trail leads there, and there are people who want to control what gets found when it does." He leaned forward slightly. "The people who designed the classification need certain things to stay buried. Specifically, they need the Echo 9 personnel to stay unaccounted for or silent." "I've been silent for 6 years." "You've been invisible for 6 years. That's different." He looked at her steadily. "Being invisible requires nothing from you. Being silent, when a congressional review finds you, requires an active choice. And you're here to ask me to make that choice." "I'm here," he said, "because Rook stood up in a hospital lobby and I followed him. What happens next is yours to decide." He paused. "But I want you to know what you're deciding." She looked at him. In his face was something she hadn't seen in a long time. Not admiration exactly, not the thing people showed when they learned about your record and put you in a box labeled impressive. Something more like recognition, the kind that comes from 2 people who have been in proximity to the same darkness and know each other for it. "How did they know you'd come to Delwood?" she asked. "They didn't. This is coincidence." "I don't believe in coincidence." "Neither do I," he said. "But I believe in Rook, and Rook found you, and here we are." He drank his coffee. "The review is being accelerated. Someone is pushing it from the inside. In the next 60 to 90 days, names are going to start appearing on documents that people have been assuming were permanently sealed. My name." "Your name, yes. And your record, which, if it becomes public under the current classification framework, gets sanitized to the point of being unrecognizable. Or," he stopped. "Or it becomes part of a counter-narrative," Megan said, "that someone wants to control." He looked at her, said nothing, which was its own answer. She sat with that for a moment. Outside the window, the street was ordinary. A woman walking a stroller, a delivery truck double-parked, a man scrolling his phone at a crosswalk. Delwood, Colorado, mid-afternoon, Thursday. The most normal-looking possible backdrop for a conversation about classified military operations and political machinery and a part of her life she had driven 1,200 miles to leave behind. "I need to think," she said. "I know. I'm not saying yes, I'm saying I need to think." "That's fair." He reached into his jacket pocket and set a card on the table. Plain white, a phone number, a name. No organization, no title. "When you want to talk more." She looked at the card. Didn't pick it up yet. "How's your leg?" she asked. He looked slightly surprised by the question. "Better than it was. Still not good." "What's the injury?" "Femoral fracture, secondary vascular repair, 6 weeks post-op." She nodded, filed it. "You should be using a walker, not crutches. The lateral instability at 6 weeks puts stress on the repair site." He looked at her for a moment. "Noted." She picked up the card and put it in her pocket and stood up. "I'll call you," she said. Not a promise, not a dismissal, Just a statement of a possible future. She walked out of Lugar's and back to her car and sat in the driver's seat with the card in her hand and looked at the mountains again. Her phone showed 3 missed calls, all from an unknown Colorado number she'd never seen before. Not Ortega, not the hospital, not anyone in her phone. She stared at the number for a long moment and then put the phone face down on the seat and drove home. The apartment was quiet, in the way that apartments are quiet when someone has been living alone in them long enough for the silence to feel normal rather than empty. Books stacked on the counter, a pair of running shoes by the door, a window over the kitchen sink that looked out at the parking lot, and a strip of sky above the building across the street. She changed out of her scrubs because she wasn't going back to the hospital, and there was no reason to wear them. And she stood in the kitchen in jeans and a flannel shirt and made a second cup of coffee that she didn't drink, and then picked up the phone and called the unknown number back. It rang twice. Ms. Pruitt? A man's voice. Unfamiliar. Careful, formal, the kind of careful that is its own kind of signal. Thank you for returning the call. Who is this? My name is Warren Doyle. I'm a legal liaison working with the Inspector General's office for the Department of Defense. A pause. I understand you had an unexpected encounter today. The cold thing at the base of her spine returned. How do you know about that? She asked. Because we've had Commander Graves under low-level monitoring as part of the review process, Doyle said. We noted his location change today, specifically that he spent an extended period at Callaway Regional Medical Center. That's not on his consult itinerary. You're watching him. We're watching the perimeter of the review. There's a difference. He paused. Ms. Pruitt, I want to be straightforward with you. We located you approximately 8 months ago. We have been, deliberately, leaving you alone. That decision may need to change. She sat down on the kitchen counter. The coffee was getting cold. Why? Because the review has developed in a direction that makes your account material. Specifically, the events of the last 72 hours of Operation Kestrel Fall. Another pause. There are people who know your name is in those records, and there are people who would prefer that you remain unreachable. You're telling me I'm in danger. I'm telling you that remaining invisible is no longer entirely your choice to make. He said it without drama, which was somehow more unsettling than if he'd said it dramatically. We would like to speak with you, formally, voluntarily, with full legal protection, before someone else makes contact in a manner that is neither formal nor voluntary. Megan looked at the window, the parking lot, the strip of sky. Give me 48 hours, she said. Ms. Pruitt, 48 hours, then I'll call you back. She ended the call. She sat on the kitchen counter for a long time in the quiet apartment, and outside the sun was going down behind the mountains and the sky was doing the thing it does in Colorado at dusk, all the colors it doesn't have time for during the day coming out at once. And she looked at it and thought about the patient she'd stabilized in the morning and the one she'd flagged on the 3rd floor, and the man in the lobby, and the card in her pocket, and the voice on the phone. And she thought about all the ways the last 14 months had felt like an ending. Quiet, anonymous, sustainable, and all the ways today had felt like something else entirely. She ran at 5:30 in the morning before it was light. 6 miles, same route most days, a loop through the neighborhood south of her building and up to the ridge trail and back. It was cold enough for breath to show and quiet enough to hear her footsteps clearly, and she ran without music because she had stopped running with music years ago for reasons that were specific and that she didn't revisit. She ran, and she thought, which was why she ran. She thought about Graves. She thought about Doyle's call and what it meant that the IG's office had been watching Graves, and what it meant that they'd found her 8 months ago and said nothing, and what it meant that they were saying something now. She thought about the timeline Graves had given her, 60 to 90 days, and whether that was accurate or a pressure tactic, and concluded it was probably both. She thought about Kestrel Fall, which she had not thought about deliberately in 6 years. She had thought about specific moments from it, the way you think about something you're not thinking about. Images surfacing in the early morning, in the moments before sleep, edges rather than centers. The field conditions, the specific weight of certain decisions. A face, more than one face. She did not think about her husband in the way Doyle's call had almost made her. because that was the box she kept the most carefully, and she was not going to open it at 5:30 in the morning on a ridge trail with her breath showing in the cold. She ran back to her building and showered and sat at her kitchen table with her phone and pulled up the local news. The Callaway Regional story was there. Not front page, but there. A brief item about an unnamed nurse being terminated, a patient safety advocate quoted anonymously saying that contract staff faced impossible situations when donor access took priority over clinical need. Nothing specific. Nothing with her name. But the shape of it was recognizable. She scrolled further. There was a second item, smaller, tucked beneath local politics, and a piece about the ski season, Callaway Regional CEO. Harrison Voss had issued a statement reaffirming the hospital's commitment to consistent patient-centered excellence and appropriate staff conduct standards. She read the statement twice. Then she put down the phone. Her coffee was getting cold again. She was developing a habit. She picked up Graves's card. She thought about what Doyle had said, that remaining invisible was no longer entirely her choice, that someone would make contact if she didn't. She thought about the resident standing outside Delgado's room, waiting for a page that wasn't being answered. About the two residents with their clipboards. About a building full of people doing their best under a system managed by a man who had invited a wealthy family's son to a private suite while a cardiac patient went unstable in the ward below. She had not come to Delwood for any of this. She had come to Delwood because it was where the contract was, and it was far enough from where she'd been, and she had intended to finish the contract and move somewhere else, and do it again, the way she'd been doing it. Moving every year or two, staying temporary, staying invisible. She picked up her phone and called Graves. He answered on the second ring. "Pruitt, I want to know more about the review," she said. "Okay." "Not over the phone. Luger's is open at 7. She looked at the clock, 6:42. "I'll be there at 8. I'll have coffee ready." She ended the call and stood up and put her jacket on and was 3 steps from the door when her phone rang again. Not Graves, not Doyle, not any number she recognized. She looked at the screen, Colorado prefix, local exchange, unfamiliar last 4 digits. She answered it. The voice on the other end was male, young, and tightly controlled in the specific manner of someone working hard not to sound frightened. "Is this Megan Pruitt?" "Yes." "Who's this?" "My name is Devin Lara. I'm a brief hesitation. "I work in administration at Callaway Regional, Finance Department. I've been there for 3 years. She waited. "I heard what happened to you yesterday," Lara said. I have something you should see. Something I've been trying to figure out what to do with for about 4 months." Another pause. "It's about the documentation they used to terminate you, the write-ups in your file." "What about them?" "They don't exist," he said. "They were created yesterday morning. I was in the system doing a quarterly audit, and I saw the timestamps. Someone created 3 separate write-up records in your personnel file between 9 and 10 a.m. yesterday, and backdated them to make them look like they'd been entered over the past 8 months. His voice was careful, controlled, scared. "I wasn't supposed to see it. The person who did it didn't know I was running an audit that would surface the metadata." Megan stood by her door with her jacket half on. "Why are you calling me?" she asked. "Because—" He stopped. "Because it's not the first time. I've found documentation irregularities before, mostly financial. Expense reports that don't match purchase records, donor transactions routed through accounts that shouldn't be handling that kind of money, and some of it—" He stopped again. "Some of it involves patient billing, systematic overcharges to specific insurance categories. I flagged it internally 4 months ago and nothing happened. And last month I got a performance review that said I had a pattern of creating friction within the finance team." "You think they're going to come after you?" "I think they already have." His voice cracked slightly, just at the edge. He steadied it. "I've been keeping copies, not in the hospital system, offline, personal drive, backed up. I don't know what to do with it. I didn't know who to call. But when I heard about you, I thought—" A pause. "You weren't the only one. That's what I wanted you to know. You weren't the only one." She finished putting on her jacket. "Don't go into work today," she said. "What?" "Call in sick, whatever excuse. Don't go in until you've talked to someone who can advise you on next steps. Do you understand? Yes. Write down everything you just told me. Times, dates, what you found, who you reported it to, what the response was. Everything. Keep it somewhere they can't access. She paused. And don't talk to anyone at that hospital until you've talked to an employment attorney. A silence on the line, then, are you going to do something with this? She thought about Graves at Lugar's at 8 o'clock with coffee ready. She thought about Warren Doyle in the IG's office and 48 hours that she had already been spending without meaning to spend them on exactly this. I'm working on it, she said. She ended the call and stood for a moment in the entryway of her apartment with her jacket on and her phone in her hand and the morning light coming through the window over the kitchen sink. And she thought that she had been in Delwood for 14 months trying not to be involved in anything. She seemed to be losing that particular effort at speed. She put her phone in her pocket, picked up her keys, and went out the door. She was halfway to her car when she saw the sedan parked across the street that had not been there the night before. Dark blue, no plates visible from this angle, two figures inside who did not appear to be waiting for anyone and did not appear to be going anywhere. She looked at it for exactly as long as it took to note the make and the approximate position of the driver. Then she got in her car and backed out of her space and drove toward Lugar's without looking back. But her hands, for the first time since the emergency ward, were not entirely steady. Lugar's was quiet at 8 in the morning, quieter than it had been the afternoon before, and Graves was already at the corner table with 2 coffees and Rook flat beneath his chair when Megan came through the door. She sat down and told him about the sedan before she touched the coffee. Graves listened without interrupting. When she finished, he looked at the window, not at the street outside, at the glass itself, at the angle of reflection, and then looked back at her. Colorado plates or federal? I couldn't see plates from my angle. The positioning was deliberate. Make? Ford Fusion, dark blue, maybe 2021 or 2022. 2 occupants, front seats only. Engine was running. He was quiet for a moment. Doyle's people don't run surveillance like that, too visible. That's not IG style. Then whose style is it? He wrapped his hands around his cup. There are people adjacent to this review who are not interested in it going well. I told you that. You told me in broad terms. I need specifics. I know. He looked at her. The classification on Kestrel Fall was requested by a man named Aldous Frey. He was deputy director of a program coordination office that doesn't officially exist anymore. He retired 2 years ago, but he has relationships that are still active, and he has a significant personal interest in certain aspects of that operation staying buried. What aspects? Graves was quiet for a moment that was longer than a pause and shorter than a refusal. The last 72 hours of the operation. There were decisions made about resource allocation and extraction priority that Frey signed off on. Decisions that... He stopped. That didn't go the way they should have. Megan looked at him. He met her eyes. Your husband, he said. The extraction timeline. She put down her coffee cup very carefully on the table. Yes, he said. That's what they want buried, and that's why your account is material. You were there. You are the only person who was present for both the medical decisions and the command decisions in that window. The coffee shop was quiet around them. Somewhere behind the counter, a grinder ran for a few seconds and stopped. Frey thinks I'll talk, she said. Frey knows what you saw. He doesn't know what you'll do with it, and that uncertainty is what makes you a problem. Graves turned his cup slowly. The IG office finding you and sitting on it for 8 months, that was partly protective. If they'd moved on you publicly, it would have signaled Frey that you were locatable. But now something changed. The subcommittee timeline accelerated by about 6 weeks. Someone internal pushed it, which means the window for managing the narrative just got shorter, and the people who want to manage it are moving faster. She thought about the sedan outside her apartment building. 2 figures, engine running, positioned for observation rather than concealment. Not professional enough for federal surveillance. Professional enough to want her to know they were there. They weren't trying to hide from me, she said. No. That's a message. Yes. She thought about that for a moment. How long have you known where I was? He looked at her steadily. 3 weeks. And you came to Callaway Regional for a consult. I came for the consult. I knew you were in Delwood. I did not know you worked at Callaway, and I did not go there looking for you. He paused. Rook found you. That part was exactly what I told you it was. She decided to believe him, for now, because the alternative was to spend energy she didn't have on suspicion that might be unproductive. There's something else, she said, and told him about Devin Lara. Graves listened with the same still attention he'd given everything else. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Finance irregularities, he said. Personnel file manipulation. Donor access over clinical priority. He looked at her. That's not a coincidence either. I know. Hospitals with this profile, the pattern usually goes deeper than one bad administrator. It's systemic, built up over years. He paused. If Lara has documentation with clean metadata, that's actionable. That's the kind of thing the State Health Board and the Federal Billing Oversight Office care about a great deal. He's scared. He should be. But scared and documented is better than scared and empty-handed. Graves reached into his jacket and wrote a name and number on the back of a napkin and slid it across to her. That's an attorney who works healthcare whistleblower cases. She's solid. If Lara calls her, she'll know what to do with what he has. Megan took the napkin. She thought about the young man's voice on the phone. Controlled, frightened, carrying something he didn't know how to put down. She knew something about that particular weight. She started to stand. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Ortega. She answered it. Pruitt. Ortega's voice was different from the last two calls. Not tight, not urgent in the clinical way, but something else. Strained. I know you're not supposed to be... I know. But I need to tell you something because I don't know who else to tell. What happened? Delgado is stable. Wen caught the bleed, he's going to be fine. That's not... She stopped. Voss called a staff meeting this morning. Emergency, all nursing floor leads. He told them that there had been an unauthorized access incident yesterday, that an individual who had been terminated had re-entered the building and accessed a patient on the third floor without authorization. He said there would be a security review. He said anyone who had assisted or facilitated that access would face disciplinary action. Megan was still. He named you, Ortega said. He said your name in the meeting. He said you had a pattern of unsafe behavior and that the hospital was considering filing a complaint with the state nursing board. On what grounds? He didn't say specifically. He said unauthorized medical intervention and patient safety concerns. Ortega's voice was tight with something that was not quite anger and not quite fear but lived in the territory between them. Pruitt, Dr. Wen pushed back. She said you flagged a patient who would have coded within the hour and that your intervention was clinically appropriate. Voss told her the review would take all factors into account. Megan looked at the window of Lugar's. A woman walked by outside with a dog, not a service animal, a small white thing with a red collar, and the ordinariness of it was almost jarring. Okay, she said. Are you okay? I'm okay. She paused. Ortega, what happened to the first patient, the man from yesterday morning? Ballard. He's in cardiology, stable. His family's been there since last night. Good. Pruitt, call me if anything changes clinically on your end. Don't take any actions that could put your position at risk. She paused. Thank you for calling. She ended the call and looked at Graves. He had heard enough from her side of the conversation to read the shape of it. He's going after your license. He's going after the threat, she said, which is me. Because I'm not in the building anymore, and that means I'm harder to control. She sat back down. The coffee was cold, but she drank it anyway. He knows I saw what he did in that ward. He knows Dr. Wen knows. If he can get a nursing board complaint on the record before anyone starts looking at Callaway seriously, it reframes everything. I become the problem instead of him. Preemptive discrediting. It's not a new strategy. Graves looked at her with that expression again, the layered one. Recognition and something heavier beneath it. Doyle needs to know about this, all of it. Lara, the personnel file manipulation, the nursing board threat. He paused. Pruitt, this connects. A CEO willing to falsify personnel records and weaponize a professional licensing board against a nurse who got in his way. That's not a careful man. That's a man who's used to operating without consequences. And an institution that operates like that has other things wrong with it. I know. The IG's office cares about the military piece. The state health board cares about the hospital piece. But there may be a federal angle on the billing irregularities that Doyle's office could route to the right place. He paused. If you're willing to talk to him. She thought about 48 hours. She thought about how 14 months of invisibility had ended in approximately 36 hours. Call him, she said. Set it up for today. Butchette. Doyle came to Delwood by mid-afternoon. He was not what she had expected from his phone voice. Shorter, rounder, with the slightly distracted manner of an academic rather than a federal official, wire-rimmed glasses and a jacket that didn't quite fit. But his eyes were sharp and his questions were precise, and he listened to everything she and Graves said without writing anything down, which meant he was recording it, or he had a very good memory, and she suspected both. They met at Graves' hotel because it was neutral ground, and because Megan was not going to bring federal officials to her apartment until she had a clearer picture of the sedan situation, which had resolved itself by mid-morning. When she drove past her building on the way to the hotel, the spot was empty. She didn't know if that was reassuring or not. Doyle listened to the full account of Callaway. The incident in the emergency ward, the termination, Delgado, Laura's call, the staff meeting, the nursing board threat. And when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The backdated documentation, he said. If Laura can produce the metadata, that's a clean falsification of employment records. That's actionable independent of anything else. There's also the billing irregularities, Graves said. That's a different office, but yes, absolutely rootable. Doyle looked at Megan. Ms. Pruitt, I want to be clear about something. The reason I'm here today, the reason I was authorized to move the timeline on speaking with you, is because of the military review. What's happening at Callaway Regional is, from my official mandate, a separate matter. He paused. But I'm a person as well as an official, and what you've described at that hospital is serious, and it has a documented victim in you and potentially others, and I'm going to make sure the right people know about it. What does talking to you about Kestrel Fall actually mean? Megan asked. Practically, what does it require from me? A formal voluntary statement, protected under the Military Whistleblower Protection Act, and a separate IG shield I can put in writing today. You tell us what you witnessed during the final 72 hours of the operation. We use it as part of a larger evidentiary picture. He looked at her steadily. Your account is one piece, but it's a piece that currently exists nowhere in any record because the original debriefs were classified and then sanitized and then… He stopped. They don't reflect what happened. She sat with that. What happened? 3 words that contained years. If I do this, she said, what changes? For the review? Potentially a lot. The classification gets challenged at the subcommittee level. The records get corrected. Phrase decisions get scrutinized. He paused. For you, specifically, there are commendations in your record that were classified along with everything else. Actions you took during Kestrel Fall that were recommended for formal recognition and then buried with the rest of it. He said this carefully, watching her reaction. That recognition exists in sealed records. It could be unsealed. That's not why I'd do it. I know, he said. I'm telling you anyway. Rook, under Graves's chair, shifted slightly. Outside the hotel window, the mountains were going gold in the late afternoon light, the shadows on the lower slopes lengthening. She thought about her husband, about a window of 72 hours that had gone wrong in ways that had been officially recorded as unavoidable, about a decision Aldous Frey had signed off on that she had watched unfold in real time in field conditions, with her hands and her equipment and her training all fully deployed, and it had not been enough because the decision that mattered had been made above her, and it had been made wrong. She thought about Devin Laur's voice on the phone, controlled, frightened, carrying something he didn't know how to put down. She thought about the resident standing in the hallway waiting for a page that wasn't being answered. I'll make the statement, she said. Doyle nodded once. He reached into his briefcase and produced a document. I'll need you to review this protective agreement first. Take whatever time. He stopped. All 3 of them stopped. Graves's phone had buzzed. He looked at it and something changed in his face, a tightening, the specific expression of someone receiving information that requires immediate processing. What? Megan said. He looked up. There's been an incident at Callaway Regional. She was already picking up her jacket. Mass casualty situation in the emergency ward, Graves said, reading from his phone. Gas line rupture in the East Wing maintenance corridor. At least one confirmed structural failure. Unknown number of patients affected. Local EMS is overwhelmed. How many staff on the floor? She asked, not stopping. I don't know. She was at the door. Pruitt, Doyle said behind her. You are not authorized. I know, she said. And she went through the door and down the corridor and out of the hotel into the late afternoon, where the mountains were still going gold and the sky was still doing its evening colors, and somewhere across the city, in a building that had fired her yesterday morning, people were hurt, and the staff-to-patient ratio was about to become catastrophic. She got in her car and drove. Callaway Regional's east side was visible from 4 blocks out. Not flames, the gas had apparently not ignited, but the visual chaos that precedes and follows a structural event. 3 ambulances already in the bay with more incoming, a fire truck at the service entrance, people in scrubs outside the building who should have been inside. A police unit was trying to establish a perimeter and failing because the volume of people moving in and out was too high to manage cleanly. She parked on a side street and walked to the main entrance fast and assessed as she moved. The lobby was not the lobby she had walked through yesterday. It was a triage point now, poorly organized. 3 patients on gurneys that had been moved out of the ward, 2 nursing staff trying to do intake on 4 people simultaneously, a security guard talking into his radio with the specific expression of someone whose radio was not helping. She stopped at the nearest nurse, a young man she didn't recognize, genuinely overwhelmed, a clipboard in one hand and a BP cuff in the other, and the expression of someone who had not trained for this precise scenario. How many down? She asked. He looked at her. How many patients are unmanaged right now? He looked at his clipboard. The East Wing had 11 patients when the rupture happened. We got 7 out. The other 4 are... He stopped. The corridor is partially blocked. Structural issue. Maintenance is trying to clear it, but nobody knows if it's load-bearing. Where's the incident command? Dr. Fasulo is trying to Kios. Where is he? Ward station, 2nd floor. She moved toward the elevator and then stopped, because the elevator was occupied by 2 paramedics with a gurney and the patient on it was actively seizing. She took the stairs. The 2nd floor was controlled chaos with an emphasis on chaos. Fasulo was at the nursing station with a phone in each hand, and when he saw Megan, he did the same thing every person had done, the cycle of recognition and confusion. And then something else crossed his face, something that looked briefly like relief he didn't want to show. You can't be here, he said. I'm aware. What do you have? 4 patients isolated in the East Corridor. 1 is post-surgical, 48 hours out from a bowel resection. She should not be moved without a team. 1 is on a vent. 1 is a pediatric patient, 8 years old, admitted for observation after a head injury. He paused. 1 is a trauma patient who came in an hour ago, GSW to the chest. He's in critical. Who's with them? 1 nurse, Tran. She stayed when everyone else came out. She's been managing 4 patients alone for, he checked, 22 minutes. 22 minutes. 1 nurse, 4 patients, 1 of them on a vent, and 1 of them freshly post-surgical, and 1 of them a child, and 1 of them a gunshot chest. Is the corridor passable? There's a section of ceiling tile down and a support fixture that came loose. Maintenance says it's not structural, but they're not certain, and I can't ask. I'm going in, she said. Pruitt, if that fixture, then I'll deal with it when I get there. She turned to the nearest nurse, Ortega, who had just come up the stairwell and stopped dead when she saw Megan. I need a trauma bag, whatever's stocked. Airway kit if you have it loose. And I need someone to get Wen on the phone because the post-surgical patient is going to need a physician assessment before any transport decision gets made. Ortega stared at her for 1 second. Then she went to the supply cabinet. Fasulo was looking at Megan with an expression she didn't have time to interpret. I treated 2 of your patients yesterday and you called it unauthorized intervention, she said. So either call security or get out of my way. He got out of her way. She took the trauma bag from Ortega and went down the corridor toward the East Wing. Halfway down, the light changed. One of the ceiling fixtures was hanging at an angle, still live. throwing uneven light across a section of hallway where ceiling tiles had come down and a metal conduit bracket had pulled away from the wall, hanging loose. The drywall around it cracked in a pattern that made her slow down and look at it carefully. She assessed the bracket, assessed the ceiling, assessed the cracked pattern, horizontal, consistent with vibration rather than vertical load stress. Maintenance was probably right that it wasn't structural. Probably. She stepped past it carefully and kept going. The corridor ahead opened into the East Wing's secondary patient area, and she could see the light was still on, and she could hear, before she got there, a child crying. Not screaming, not the sharp acute cry of acute pain, but the sustained, exhausted cry of a child who has been frightened for a long time and is starting to run out of the energy to show it. She pushed through the door. Nurse Tran was 30 years old and had been at Callaway for 5 years and was currently doing something extraordinary and doing it quietly, moving between 4 patients in a space designed for orderly workflow, not emergency isolation, managing monitors and IV lines and a ventilator alarm that had been sounding for an unknown amount of time. She looked up when Megan came through the door, and her face did something complicated that Megan recognized as the expression of someone who has been alone with a hard thing for too long and has just seen another person. "Vent alarm's a pressure fluctuation, not obstruction," Tran said immediately, pointing to the ventilated patient, a heavy-set man in his 60s, sedated, his chest rising with mechanical regularity. "I've checked the circuit twice. I think it's the sensor." "Which sensor?" "Inspiratory pressure. It's reading high, but his lungs sound clear and his SATs are 94. Megan went to the vent, ran her hands along the circuit, found the sensor connection at the humidifier chamber. Slightly loose, just enough. She reseated it. The alarm stopped. "The post-surgical patient?" she asked. "Mrs. Okafor. She's been stable, but she's frightened, and she tried to get up about 10 minutes ago. I got her back down, but she's been asking about her daughter." Tran's voice was steady, professional. Below it, the strain of 22 minutes alone with 4 critical patients. Megan looked at the child. A girl, 8 years old, dark-haired, in a standard pediatric gown, sitting up in her bed with her knees pulled to her chest and her face turned away from the room. The crying had diminished to something quieter and more internal. "Hey," Megan said, moving to her. "What's your name?" The girl turned her head slowly. Her eyes were red and her face was blotchy. "Cora," she said. "I'm Megan. I'm going to check on you for a second, okay? Can you tell me if your head hurts?" "A little." "Same as before or more than before?" Cora considered this with the particular seriousness of children processing questions. "Same," she said. "Okay, good." Megan checked her pupils. Equal and reactive, appropriate response. The monitoring was intact. "Can you stay sitting up for me for a bit?" "Just like that." Cora nodded. Megan straightened and turned to the 4th patient, the chest GSW. Male, mid-20s, intubated, 2 large-bore IVs, a chest tube on the right side that was draining appropriately, an arterial line in the right wrist. His monitor showed a blood pressure of 91/60 and a heart rate of 118. "How long has his pressure been in the 90s?" she asked. "It was 105 when they brought him in here. That was..." Tran checked her watch. 30 minutes ago. 14-point drop in 30 minutes. Less acute than Delgado yesterday, but the trajectory was the same direction. She assessed the chest tube output. Sanguineous drainage, more than she wanted to see. She checked the dressing on his chest wound. "Did the physician do a fast exam before they moved him?" she asked. "I don't know. He came in from the trauma bay when they were evacuating the ward and everything was..." Tran stopped. "It was chaotic. It was always chaotic. That was the thing nobody told you before the first time, or the thing you forgot between times. Not what to do, but how to do what you knew to do when everything was noise and incomplete information and someone in the corner was crying and a ventilator was alarming and you'd been alone for 22 minutes. Megan stood between the 4 patients and made the triage calculation she'd been making her whole adult life. Not fast or loose, but fast and exact. The specific kind of focus that came from years of fieldwork in conditions where the math had real consequences. The chest patient was her most acute. His pressure was the most unstable trajectory. But the vent patient needed stable monitoring. The post-surgical patient needed reassurance and positioning maintenance. The child needed someone in the room. She pulled her phone and called Ortega. I need a second nurse in here, and I need Wen down here personally for the post-surgical patient before anyone considers transport. Wen is 2 minutes out, Ortega said. I called her when you went down the corridor. Good. What's the status on the corridor clearance? Maintenance says 10 to 15 minutes. They're being careful because… Ortega stopped. Pruitt, Voss is in the building. She absorbed that. Where? At the main nursing station. He's been on the phone with the hospital's legal team for the last 20 minutes. Someone told him you're here. A pause. He's furious. She looked at the corridor, the damaged section she'd passed through, the loose bracket, the cracked drywall. 10 to 15 minutes to clear. She looked at the chest patient. Heart rate now 122, pressure holding at 91 for the moment. She looked at the child, Cora, who had stopped crying and was watching her with wide, tired eyes. She heard footsteps in the corridor. Multiple sets, moving quickly. Not maintenance. The footsteps of people who were not coming to help. And behind them, further away, a different sound. Something she registered before she could identify it. A low, distant percussion that she placed after 2 seconds. Rotors. Helicopters. More than one. And not the hospital's single medevac bird. A different sound signature. Heavier. Multiple aircraft. The kind of sound she had not heard outside of one specific context in the last 6 years. She turned and looked at the window at the end of the East Wing corridor. Through the glass, above the city, 3 military helicopters were descending toward Callaway Regional's helipad. The rotors got louder. Not the single medevac bird that Callaway kept on the helipad for trauma transfers. That one had a light, functional sound, a workhorse sound. This was something else. The triple beat of military aircraft, heavy and deliberate, the kind of sound that took up space in the air around it and made people stop and look up. Megan stood at the East Wing window for 2 seconds. Then she turned back to her patients because the helicopters were not her immediate problem, and the chest patient's heart rate was now 124. Tran, she said, I need you on the vent patient. Monitor his pressures every 2 minutes and call out anything that changes. Don't adjust settings without telling me first. Tran moved without question. Megan went back to the chest patient. Bautista, the name band said, Daniel, 26, and stood at his bedside and ran through the calculus again. The chest tube was draining at a rate that was on the wrong side of acceptable. His pressure had been stable at 91 for the last 8 minutes, but stable at 91 was not the same as safe. It was the plateau that sometimes preceded a drop, the body running out of compensatory reserves. She checked the tube insertion site. Secure. Checked the drainage chamber. The fluid column was moving with respiration, which meant the tube was patent and the output in the collection chamber was… She looked at the volume. Did the math against the time since he'd been moved here. When did this tube go in? She asked. Tran called from across the room. I don't know. He came from trauma. There was no insertion time documented on the chamber. That was a gap. And in a perfect world, she would have the chart and the surgical notes and an attending at her elbow. But the world in this corridor was not perfect and had not been since the gas rupture. She looked at the drainage volume and the color and made a decision from what she had. He was losing blood into his chest cavity. The tube was keeping up with it for now, but the source was still active, and if she didn't flag this in the next 20 minutes, the plateau would end. She called Ortega. I need a cardiothoracic surgeon down here. Bautista in the East Wing is draining too fast for a managed bleed. He needs reevaluation for surgical intervention. Dr. Fasulo is not Fasulo. Who's the CT surgeon on call? A pause. Dr. Merritt? He's in the building. Get him? She hung up and looked at the door because the footsteps she'd heard a minute ago had stopped just outside it and had not resumed, which meant someone was standing in the corridor and not coming in. She went to the door and opened it. Harrison Voss was standing in the damaged corridor with 2 security officers and a man in a suit she didn't recognize. Legal, the suit said, or at least institutional backup of some kind. Voss's face was the face of a man who had arrived prepared for a confrontation and had been briefly interrupted by the sounds coming from 3 military helicopters settling onto the roof of his hospital. He recovered fast. Miss Pruitt, he said. Mr. Voss. She kept her hand on the door frame. Behind her, the soft, regular sound of the ventilator and Tran's voice saying a number quietly. "You are trespassing on hospital property," he said. "You have been informed of your terminated status, and you have been—" "I have 4 critical patients in this room," she said. "One is on a vent. One is a post-surgical patient who is not cleared for transport. One is a pediatric patient. One has a chest tube draining at a rate that is going to require surgical evaluation in the next 15 minutes. She met his eyes. "Dr. Merritt is on his way down. When he gets here and the patients are stable for transport, I'll walk out voluntarily. Until then, I'm staying." Voss looked at the security officers. "Sir," one of them said, not Denny, but someone who had worked with Denny long enough to absorb something of his manner. "There are military personnel upstairs." Voss turned his head slightly. "What?" "3 aircraft on the helipad. Navy, sir. They came in about 4 minutes ago. I've been getting calls from the front desk." Something moved across Voss's face. A recalibration, brief but visible. The expression of a man who had planned for one kind of afternoon and was being asked to manage a different one entirely. "Deal with it," he said. Then he looked back at Megan. "You are not a licensed employee of this institution. Every action you take in that room is unauthorized and documented." "Document whatever you want," she said, and closed the door. Dr. Merritt arrived 11 minutes later. A lean man in his 60s, still in surgical blues, clearly pulled from something else, with the brisk manner of a surgeon who had learned to assess quickly and act on the assessment rather than waiting for certainty. He looked at Bautista, looked at the drainage chamber, asked 2 questions, got 2 answers, and pulled out his phone to call the OR. "You caught this early," he said to Megan, not looking at her, already dialing. "The tube insertion time wasn't documented." "I know, the intake was compromised." He paused, phone to his ear. "You're Pruitt, the nurse from yesterday." "Yes." He looked at her then, briefly, with an expression that was not easy to read. "Wen told me what you did with Delgado." He turned back to his call. "I need an OR for Bautista, chest case, sooner than I'd like." She left him with the patient. Merritt had it. She moved to the post-surgical patient, Mrs. Okafor, 62, a tall woman with her hair wrapped even in the hospital bed who had been watching the room with the specific attention of someone who was frightened and dealing with it by tracking everything she could see. "Is my daughter here?" she asked when Megan got close. "I don't know. What's her name? I'll have someone check." "Adeyeze. She was in the lobby when—" Okafor stopped. "When everything happened." "I'll find out." Megan checked her abdomen. Soft, no distension, the surgery holding. Her vitals were stable. "How's your pain?" "I'm okay." A pause. "You've been running this room for a long time." "Tran has been running it. I'm just extra hands." Okafor looked at her. "I've been watching. You're the one making the decisions." She said it without judgment, as a statement of observable fact. "You know what you're doing." Megan said nothing. She adjusted the patient's pillow, checked the IV site, made a note. "Adeyeze," Okafor said again. "I'll find her," Megan said, and meant it. Yes. The corridor had been cleared by maintenance, the bracket removed, the affected section of ceiling documented and flagged, the path declared passable for gurney transport. One by one, the patients were moved. The vent patient to the ICU with Tran accompanying the transfer. Bautista to the OR with Merritt. Okafor to a clean room on the 2nd floor where, 10 minutes after the transfer, Adeyeze Okafor arrived through the ward doors at a speed that suggested she had been trying to get through the security perimeter for the better part of an hour. That left Cora. The 8-year-old was still sitting up in her bed when the room had emptied around her, the monitors and the IV pole, and the residue of 4 People's Crisis the only company she had. She had her knees pulled up, and she was looking at the door. "Hey," Megan said. "Where are the others?" "Moved to better rooms?" She sat down in the chair beside the bed. "A doctor is going to come check you out in a few minutes, and then we're going to find your parents and get you to a room that's a lot nicer than this one." Cora looked at her. "Are you a doctor?" "Nurse." "You were telling the doctors what to do." "Sometimes that's how it works." The girl considered this with the same seriousness she'd applied to the headache question earlier. My mom says nurses do more work and get less credit. Your mom is correct. Cora almost smiled. Not quite, but close. Megan heard footsteps outside in the corridor again, different from before. Not the careful maintenance walk or the urgent medical rush or the deliberate tread of a CEO managing a situation. Multiple people moving together, with the particular cadence of people who have been trained to move in formation and carry it into every environment they enter. She stood up. The door opened. She had expected vaguely uniformed personnel in the abstract. What came through this door was specific. A naval officer in full-dress uniform, a woman in her late 50s with silver in her hair and a jaw like a statement, followed by two junior officers, and behind them, Nolan Graves. Graves was not on crutches. He'd left them somewhere. He was moving with a slight but visible effort, the leg unhappy with him, but moving. He looked at Megan. Something in his face shifted. The guarded, layered expression she'd been reading since the lobby yesterday, and settled into something simpler. "You're still here," he said. "Patients needed managing." The naval officer was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. Not surprise. Something beyond surprise. Something that had passed through surprise some time ago and arrived at a more complicated territory. "Chief Petty Officer Pruitt," the woman said. Megan looked at her. "I've been a civilian for 6 years." "The rank doesn't expire," the woman said. "Rear Admiral Constance Wiley, I've read your record, Chief, the complete record." She said those last two words with a weight that was specific, the one that existed before certain decisions were made about what to preserve. Megan was very still. From the bed, Cora said, "Why is she calling you Chief?" Graves' mouth did something that was almost a smile. "Long story," he said to the girl. Then to Megan, "We need to talk, but not here, and not now. There's a situation upstairs." "Voss?" "Among other things." He paused. "Doyle's team arrived 20 minutes ago. They've been speaking with Voss's legal counsel in the 4th floor conference room." "What kind of speaking?" "The kind with federal subpoenas." He looked at her steadily. "The billing irregularities Lara documented. When Doyle's office ran it through the HHS fraud database this afternoon, the pattern matched an ongoing investigation that has been building for 14 months. Callaway Regional has been systematically overbilling Medicare and Medicaid through a billing classification scheme that—" He stopped himself. "The point is, this is not a small thing, and Voss knows it now." She thought about Lara, the young finance administrator who had been keeping copies on a personal drive and calling in a scared, controlled voice at 6:40 in the morning. She thought about what it had cost him to make that call. "Is Lara safe?" she asked. "Doyle has him. He came in voluntarily 2 hours ago with the drive." Graves paused. "He asked about you." She thought about Okafor asking about her daughter, about Cora's unfinished almost smile, about the specific weight of a building full of people who were going to need someone to fight for them, whether or not anyone was paying attention. "Let's go upstairs," she said. But the 4th floor was not quiet. The carpeted corridor that had felt like a different building, darker, warmer, the hush of authority, was occupied by people it had not been designed to hold. 2 federal agents outside Voss's office, a third at the conference room door. Doyle at the far end of the corridor, speaking in low, fast sentences to a woman with a laptop who was typing everything. Paula Marsh, the HR director, sitting in a chair outside the conference room with the careful stillness of someone who had been advised not to speak and was trying very hard to comply. Megan walked through it toward the conference room and nobody stopped her, which was its own kind of information. Inside, Voss was at the table with 2 attorneys beside him and the particular physical compression of a man who has realized that the room is not arranged in his favor. He was still in the suit. The silver hair was still calibrated, but something behind his eyes had changed. The foundational assumption that had always been present, the bedrock certainty that the architecture of the situation would ultimately arrange itself around him, was cracked, not gone. Cracked. When Megan came through the door, he looked at her. "You," he said. It was a simple word and it carried a complicated weight. "The patients in the East Wing are stable," she said. "Bautista is in surgery with Merritt. Okafor and the vent patient are in appropriate rooms. The pediatric patient is ready for discharge to her parents." She set this down in front of him like a report because that was what it was. In case you wanted an update. One of the attorneys put a hand on Voss's arm. Voss ignored it. You had no authorization to be in that building, he said. His voice was controlled, but the control was effortful. You had no authorization to treat any patient, to direct any staff, to access any... The authorization question will be addressed, Doyle said from the doorway behind Megan, along with several others. Mr. Voss, we've been through the employment records for Ms. Pruitt, specifically the 3 write-up entries created in her personnel file between 9 and 10 a.m. yesterday morning. A silence. The metadata on those entries is quite clear, Doyle continued. They were created by a single user login, an administrative account that routes to your executive assistant, but the access pattern and creation timestamps are consistent with someone using that login from the 4th floor during a period when your assistant has confirmed via keycard records that he was on the 2nd floor. He paused. The records were backdated using a method that works against ordinary audit review, but not against a forensic analysis, which we completed approximately 90 minutes ago. The attorney to Voss's right started to speak. Additionally, Doyle said, the billing irregularities documented by Mr. Lara and cross-referenced with our database represent a pattern of Medicare and Medicaid fraud spanning at least 22 months, totaling, he checked something in his hand, approximately $3.1 million in false claims. The number landed in the room. Voss's face had gone a color that was not quite pale and not quite gray, but something between the two. The nursing board complaint you referenced in your staff meeting this morning, Doyle said, was discussed in an email sent from your account to the board's administrative contact at 7:42 a.m. today. That email has been preserved. He looked at Voss with the flat professional steadiness of someone who has delivered this kind of information many times and has learned to do it without emotion. The complaint was filed under false pretenses, using falsified employment documentation as supporting evidence. That constitutes obstruction. The room was very quiet. I want to note, Rear Admiral Wiley said from behind Doyle, she had come up the corridor without Megan hearing her, that the individual you filed that complaint against performed, yesterday and today, clinical interventions that by current account have directly contributed to the survival of at least 3 patients in this facility. She said it without heat, which was somehow more devastating than heat would have been. I want that on record. Voss looked at Megan across the table. She looked back at him. She thought about what she had expected to feel in this moment, something sharp or triumphant, or at minimum satisfying in a clear way. What she felt was more complicated than that. Not sympathy, not at all, but something that recognized the collapse of a man who had for a long time been the kind of person who never collapsed, and understood that this particular collapse had been built on the bodies of other people's compromised care, and found it neither satisfying nor interesting, just necessary. The way certain medical procedures were necessary. Not pleasant, not the goal in itself, but the thing you did so the body could move on. I'd like to speak with my attorneys privately, Voss said. Of course, Doyle said. The hallway outside was still full of people, and it was still too loud, and Graves was at the far end of it, leaning against the wall with his leg clearly bothering him, and Rook sitting at his feet with his usual absolute attention. Megan walked down to him. You should sit down, she said, indicating the leg. I've been sitting all day, before the helicopters. He looked at her. Are you okay? She considered the question in the way she always considered it, the reflex answer, the actual answer, the gap between them. I'm functional, she said. That's not an answer. It's the one I have right now. He accepted that without pushing, which she noted. Wiley is going to want a formal conversation with you about the statement. Tomorrow, probably. After tonight, she's got a lot of interagency communication to manage. The subcommittee timeline. It moved again. The Frey situation is, there are developments I don't have the full picture on yet. But Wiley coming here personally, today, that's not standard. He paused. She knew your record, the unredacted version. She's known it for some time. Megan looked at the window at the end of the corridor. Dark now outside, the mountains invisible, just the city lights below the black sky. What did she say when she read it? I wasn't there when she read it. I was there 2 months ago when she decided to accelerate the review. He paused. She said it was the clearest documentation of a classification decision made for political rather than security reasons she'd seen in 20 years. He looked at Megan. She said the person whose record had been buried deserved better than that. Megan said nothing for a moment. My husband's extraction, she said. That's part of what the record covers. The decision Frey made, and what you did after it. He said it carefully. What you were able to do and what you weren't able to do, and why. All of it, in the record. He paused. Not buried, sealed. There's a difference. It exists. It's documented. She had kept that in a box for 6 years. The box had stayed shut through discipline and distance and the particular daily labor of building a life that didn't require opening it. She had been good at it, mostly. She had been less good at it in the last 48 hours than she had been in the preceding 6 years, and she was not certain yet whether that was loss or relief or something that didn't have a clean name. Okay, she said. From down the corridor, Doyle appeared at the conference room door and made eye contact with her. A brief, significant look that meant something was happening inside that room. She went to him. What? She said quietly. Voss's attorneys have been on the phone with the HHS Regional Council for the past 12 minutes, Doyle said, equally quiet. They're discussing a cooperation agreement, which in plain terms means Voss is considering giving them the fuller picture on the billing scheme in exchange for reduced personal exposure. Who else is in the fuller picture? That's what we're waiting to find out. He paused. There are 2 board members whose signatures appear on financial authorization documents that should not have been authorized, and there is— He stopped. There is a question about a prior incident, a patient complaint that was filed 14 months ago and disappeared before reaching the state board. We found reference to it in Lara's documentation. A complaint about a clinical decision made under donor pressure, similar in nature to yesterday's incident. He looked at her. If that complaint was actively suppressed, it changes the scope of what we're looking at. From billing fraud and falsification to a pattern of patient safety suppression, Doyle said, which involves different statutes and different consequences and a much larger federal mandate. She stood with that for a moment. 14 months ago, she hadn't been at Callaway yet. Someone else had been at that patient's bedside. Someone had filed a complaint and it had disappeared. Find out who filed it, she said. We're working on it. She looked back at the conference room door. Through the small window in it, she could see Voss's profile. The silver hair, the good suit, the face that had been designed for confidence and was not wearing the current moment well. She thought about the building around them, 11 floors, hundreds of patients, the daily mechanical work of keeping people alive and managing the ways bodies broke down and the ways they recovered. She thought about Tran, alone for 22 minutes with 4 critical patients, doing her job with complete competence and without anyone noticing. She thought about Ortega calling her on a morning when she had every reason not to call. She thought about Merritt saying you caught this early as a statement of fact, with no surprise attached, because he was a surgeon who understood that catching things early was the whole point. The building was full of people like that. It had always been full of people like that. And above them, for years, had been a structure designed to extract from them and protect itself. Doyle, she said. He looked at her. The complaint that was filed and suppressed 14 months ago. If there's a patient attached to it, if there was a clinical outcome connected to the suppression, we'll find it. Make sure someone contacts that patient directly, she said. Not through the hospital, directly. Understood. She walked back to Graves. Wiley said tomorrow, she said. For the statement. Yes. I'll be there. He looked at her. Just like that. It was always going to be just like that, she said. I just needed to stop running from it. He was quiet for a moment. Rook stood up at their feet, stretched, looked at Megan with those steady amber eyes. From down the corridor, one of the federal agents opened the conference room door and spoke to Doyle in a low voice. Doyle turned. Whatever the agent said made Doyle's expression change. He walked back to Megan. The cooperation conversation in there, he said. Voss's attorney just disclosed something. He paused. The billing fraud. The routing accounts Lara identified. They don't terminate with Voss. She looked at him. They route to a holding company, Doyle said. The holding company has 3 beneficial owners. 2 are Callaway board members. The third, He stopped. The third is a private healthcare investment firm, founded 8 years ago by a man named Aldous Frey. The corridor was quiet for a moment, in the way corridors are quiet when everyone in them is processing the same information. Frey, Megan said. The same man who classified Kestrel Fall, Doyle said. The same man who buried your record. The same man who has a personal interest in you staying invisible. He looked at her with the flat, careful expression of someone delivering information whose full weight he is still calculating. He's been receiving distributions from a fraud scheme running through a hospital in Delwood, Colorado, for at least 22 months. She stood very still. He didn't find you by accident, Doyle said quietly. We don't know yet how much he knew about your location, but the connection is not a coincidence, she said. No, Doyle said. It is not. Down the corridor, the conference room door opened again, and one of the attorneys stepped out and asked for Doyle. And Doyle went. And Megan stood in the carpeted hallway on the 4th floor of a building she had been fired from yesterday morning and looked at the window at the end of the corridor where the city lights were spread out below the dark sky. And she understood with the specific clarity of someone who has just seen all the lines of a situation connect simultaneously that this had never been two separate problems. It had always been one. The understanding settled into her the way certain things settle, not with drama, but with the quiet finality of a door closing on the correct latch. Frey's money had been running through Callaway Regional for 22 months. She had been in Delwood for 14 of them. She didn't know yet whether that was coincidence collapsing under its own weight or something more deliberate, and she wasn't going to know tonight, and she made herself accept that, because the alternative was to stand in this corridor calculating indefinitely while the actual work continued without her. She went to find Ortega. She found her at the second-floor nursing station, charting on a screen that showed 3 open patient records simultaneously, the particular focused exhaustion of someone who had been managing a crisis for hours and was now in the aftermath phase where the body wants to stop and the work won't let it. Ortega looked up when Megan appeared, and something in her face loosened. Bautista's out of surgery, Ortega said. Merritt found a secondary bleed at the lower lobe. He's in recovery. Vitals? Stable. Actually stable, not Fasulo stable. Megan almost smiled at that. Okafor? Sleeping. Her daughter's still there. Ortega paused. The little girl, Cora, her parents came. The dad cried, like really cried. Megan looked at the station. The quiet hum of monitors, the smell of the floor, the residue of a shift that had gone sideways and been held together by the people actually doing the work. How are you? She asked. Ortega looked at her screen for a moment. Tired, she said. And I don't know. I'm glad you came back today. The patients needed managing. Stop saying that, Ortega said, not unkindly. You know that's not the whole answer. Megan didn't argue. She stood at the station for a moment and looked at the floor and let herself be tired for exactly 30 seconds, which was the amount she permitted. Then she straightened. Go home when your shift ends, she said. Actually go. You too, Ortega said. About. She didn't go home. She sat in her car in the parking lot for 40 minutes and wrote down everything she remembered about the final 72 hours of Operation Kestrel Fall. Not for Doyle, not for the statement, just for herself, in a notes app on her phone, in the sparse, precise language of someone recording clinical facts. She had not done this before. She had always believed the memory was better kept in the box, controlled, accessed only when absolutely necessary, and there was something both difficult and unexpectedly functional about the act of writing it down in the parking lot of the hospital that had fired her yesterday morning, with the city lights reflecting off the windshield and the mountains invisible in the dark. She wrote about the extraction timeline. She wrote about what she had been told and what she had been told too late. She wrote about the decisions that had been made above her pay grade and the consequences that had landed on the ground level where she was standing. And she wrote about what she had done with the time she had and the equipment she had and the people she had. And she wrote about what had not been enough and why it had not been enough and whose decision that was. She wrote her husband's name, Cale. She sat with it on the screen for a moment, those 4 letters in a note on her phone in a parking lot in Delwood, Colorado. Then she kept writing. When she was done, she read it through once. It was not complete. It was not everything, but it was more than she had ever put outside the box before, and it was accurate, and it was hers. She drove home and slept for 5 hours, which was more than she usually slept, and in the morning she called Doyle and told him she was ready. The formal statement took 3 hours. It was conducted in a federal building 20 minutes from her apartment, in a room with a recording system and 2 attorneys present, Doyle's and one assigned specifically to represent her interests, a woman named Hargraves, who had read Megan's entire file in the preceding 12 hours and asked questions that were precise and occasionally uncomfortable and exactly right. Megan told them everything. Not everything at once. Memory doesn't work like that, doesn't unspool cleanly in sequence. But everything in the aggregate, the full 72 hours, the decisions and the timeline and the moment she had understood what phrase authorization had cost and what she had done next. She told it without drama, because drama wasn't accurate, and accuracy was the point. She answered follow-up questions. She asked for breaks twice and took them. She was not perfect in the telling. She lost her place once, corrected a timeline detail, had to stop for a moment when Hargraves asked about the final hours and start again from a different entry point. She got through it. When it was done, Doyle set down his pen and looked at her. "That's the clearest account of that operation I've heard," he said. "The classified debriefs that exist they're not this. They were written to support a conclusion that had already been reached," she said. "Yes." He paused. "The subcommittee receives this record in 4 days. Frey's legal team has been notified that his name appears in 2 separate investigations, the classification review and the Callaway fraud. Their negotiating posture, which in practical terms means they're trying to figure out how much exposure he has before deciding how much to say. Will it be enough?" Doyle was quiet for a moment. "The fraud case is clean. The money trail is documented. That's going to result in charges regardless of what the classification review produces." He paused. "The Kestrel Fall piece, that's political as well as legal. What I can tell you is that the people who have the power to correct the record want to correct it. Whether that happens in the way you'd want, on the timeline you'd want, in the form you'd want, I can't promise you that." She appreciated the honesty. She had known men in authority who would have promised her everything in this room because the alternative was harder. Doyle's willingness to say what he didn't know was worth more than a clean assurance would have been. "Okay," she said. "There's one more thing," Doyle said. He exchanged a look with Hargraves and then reached into a folder. "Rear Admiral Wiley has been in communication with the Naval Personnel Command regarding your record." He set a document on the table, specifically regarding a commendation that was recommended during Operation Kestrel Fall, processed through appropriate channels, and then classified along with everything else before it could be formally awarded. She looked at the document. "The classification on that commendation has been lifted," Doyle said, "as of this morning." The ceremony was not what she expected, which was maybe appropriate. She had expected something institutional, a room full of people she didn't know, the formal machinery of military recognition playing itself out in the way formal machinery does, efficient and impersonal. What Wiley organized instead was smaller, specific. It was held in a conference room at the federal building 3 weeks after the statement. Graves was there, standing without crutches now, the leg clearly still unhappy but managed. Doyle was there. Hargraves. Ortega, who had been called by Graves and had come on her day off and was wearing the specific expression of someone who had suspected something but is still not entirely prepared for the reality of it. Dr. Wen was there, having been invited by Wiley directly, which was its own kind of statement about who Wiley thought deserved to be in the room. Devin Lara was there, thin and uncertain, still carrying the months of fear he'd been living with, but present. Wiley stood at the front of the room in full dress uniform and read from the citation. The language was military formal, the specific construction of official recognition, but underneath it the facts were clear. The operations conducted, the lives documented, the decisions made under conditions that were described in the citation with the kind of precision that left no room for reinterpretation. Kestrel Fall. The final 72 hours. What she had done and how she had done it. Megan stood and listened. She did not cry, which surprised her. And then she stopped being surprised because it made sense. This was not news to her. She had been there. She had always known what happened. The recognition was not new information. It was old information being given the shape it should have had 6 years ago, and the feeling of it was less like revelation and more like correction. Something being put back to level. Wiley pinned the commendation to her and stepped back. "The Navy has been looking forward to doing this for a long time," Wiley said. It was not a performed line, it was just true. "Thank you, Admiral," Megan said. The room applauded. Graves was first, with Rook standing at his side, apparently deciding the occasion warranted remaining upright. Ortega was louder than everyone else and didn't appear to care. Laura clapped with the careful deliberateness of someone who understood he was in a room where something significant was happening, even if he only partially understood the particulars. Wen applauded with the contained warmth of a person who does not generally express things physically, but had decided this warranted an exception. Megan looked at the room. She was not good at being looked at. She had spent years engineering the opposite. The specific texture of standing in front of people who were acknowledging something about you. Not the work. The work was easy to receive. But you, the person, what you'd carried and how you'd carried it, was uncomfortable in a way she hadn't quite prepared for. She let it be uncomfortable. It seemed like the right response. Met. The Callaway situation moved on the timeline that these things move, which was slower than satisfaction would prefer and faster than cynicism would predict. Harrison Voss was terminated by the board within 10 days of the federal investigation becoming public. The termination was not quiet. The board held a press conference, which was itself a signal of how completely the situation had turned, and the language they used was the language of institutions trying to dissociate from what they'd allowed. Megan watched the press conference on her phone in her apartment and felt nothing particularly strong about the board's performance of accountability, but noted that they named specific failures and specific dates rather than retreating to abstractions, which was at least minimally honest. Voss was subsequently charged with Medicare and Medicaid fraud, falsification of employment records, and obstruction, the nursing board complaint filed on false grounds. His 2 attorneys spent the next 2 months negotiating, and eventually he entered a cooperation agreement that put 4 other people in the frame, including both board members whose signatures were on the authorization documents. Paula Marsh resigned before charges were filed, which her attorney apparently advised as a strategic move that did not, in the end, produce the outcome she'd hoped for. The state nursing board complaint against Megan was withdrawn within 48 hours of the investigation going federal, and the board issued a written statement clearing her record. Aldous Frey's situation was more complicated and more consequential, which was accurate to who he was and what he'd done. The fraud charges came first because the evidence was clean and documented, and the money trail didn't require interpretation. He was arrested on a Tuesday, and the image of that arrest, Frey, 71 years old, in the driveway of a house in Virginia that had been purchased with money that traced back through 3 shell companies to Medicare fraud running through a hospital in Colorado, became the image that accompanied every subsequent news story about Kestrel Fall, when the classification review findings went to the subcommittee and became, eventually, public. The classification review findings were not a complete vindication of everything she wanted vindicated. The world didn't work that way, and she had known that, and the parts that were incomplete or politically hedged, she filed in a part of her mind that understood the difference between a correct outcome and a perfect one. What was corrected clearly. The record of Kestrel Fall was amended at the subcommittee level. Frey's authorization decisions were formally documented as having contributed to a preventable loss, and Cale's death was reclassified from operational incident to what it actually was. That mattered more than the parts that remained imprecise. She let it matter. Devin Lara was represented by the attorney Graves had named on the napkin, and his whistleblower claim was processed under protections that kept him employed. Not at Callaway, which was under federal oversight and undergoing structural reform, but at a regional health system 3 hours away that had hired him based on his record. He called Megan once, about 2 months after everything, to say thank you. She told him he'd done the hard part himself. He said that was easy to say from the outside. She said she knew and meant it. Callaway Regional did not close. It underwent the kind of overhaul that institutions undergo when the people running them have been removed and the regulatory bodies are paying attention. Painful, slow, with genuine uncertainty about which parts of the structure were worth preserving. The nursing and medical staff who had been there through all of it, Ortega, Tran, Wen, Merritt, others, stayed and participated in that process, which Megan thought was the harder and more necessary thing to do than leaving. Wen was appointed interim medical director 3 months into the oversight period, which she accepted with the same contained manner she brought to everything and which the staff received with visible relief. Megan's formal statement to the subcommittee was delivered in a federal hearing room in Washington in the 4th month. She sat at the table in front of a panel of legislators who had read her file and her testimony and the amended Kestrel Fall record, and she answered questions for 2 hours with the same precision she'd brought to everything else. And when it was done, she walked out of the building into November air and stood on the steps and breathed. Graves was waiting at the bottom of the steps with Rook and 2 cups of coffee from a cart across the street. He handed her one without ceremony. "How was it?" he asked. "Long." She drank the coffee. It was too hot, and she drank it anyway. Necessary. They walked. No destination in particular, just the street, the city, the cold air, the ordinary movement of people who had somewhere to be and were going there. Rook walked between them with the calm authority of a dog who had long since made peace with the pace of humans. "What are you going to do now?" Graves asked. She had been asked a version of this question several times in the preceding months, by Doyle and Hargraves and Ortega, and once by Wiley, in a conversation that was more personal than official. She had given partial answers, not because she was withholding, but because she hadn't been certain. She was more certain now. "Calloway offered me a position," she said. "Nurse manager, emergency ward, under Wen." Graves glanced at her. "And?" "I said I'd think about it." "Are you still thinking?" "Less than I was." She watched a woman across the street trying to flag a cab while managing a bag that was too heavy and a child who had opinions about direction. The cab stopped. The woman got the child in and the bag in and herself in, and the cab pulled away, and none of it was graceful, and all of it worked. The emergency ward is a functional disaster. Staff retention is a problem. The triage protocols need updating, and whoever designed the East Wing storage system should answer for it. That sounds like a yes. It sounds like there's a lot of work to do. He was quiet for half a block. Rook found something interesting in the air and dismissed it. "Your husband," Graves said. He said it carefully, not as a question exactly, as an acknowledgement. She looked at the street ahead of them. "His record was corrected," she said. "That matters." She paused. "I've been carrying the version of it that phrase people wrote for 6 years. The one that said it was unavoidable, that nobody's decision made a difference." She paused again. "It turns out the weight of a lie is different from the weight of the truth, even when the truth is still heavy." Graves nodded, said nothing, which was the right response. "He would have told me to go back," she said, "to the hospital, the ward, all of it." She said it matter-of-factly, not for comfort, just as a statement she knew to be true the way she knew clinical facts to be true. He was that kind of person. They walked a little further. The city moved around them. There's a specific kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. It doesn't stand in front of cameras or announce itself or require a uniform. It shows up at 5:30 in the morning for a 6-mile run in the cold, and it goes back through the hospital doors after being told to leave, and it stays in the corridor with 4 critical patients while the building holds its uncertain breath, and it makes the phone call to a federal official at 6:40 in the morning with a frightened voice and a personal drive full of evidence. It is the courage of people who are doing the hard thing, not because anyone is watching, but because it is the hard thing, and it needs doing. Megan Pruitt had spent years believing that disappearing was the same as being at peace with what she'd survived. She had been wrong, and the correction of that particular error had cost her more than most corrections cost, and she had come out of it with something she couldn't have manufactured or planned for, the knowledge that the work was still the work, still mattered, still claimed her in the specific way it had always claimed her, and that no amount of distance or silence could change the fact that she was someone who stayed. Not because she needed to be seen, not because the recognition had anything essential to do with it, because patients needed managing. She took the Calloway position. On her first day as nurse manager of the emergency ward, She arrived at 6:50 a.m., 10 minutes before her shift, walked through the lobby where a military service dog had stood up and changed the trajectory of her life 4 months ago, took the elevator to the second floor, stood at the nursing station, and read through the overnight charts with the same focused quiet she'd brought to every other handoff she'd ever done. Ortega came in at 7 and found her there. "You're early," Ortega said. "The night shift left a documentation gap on 2 patients in Bay 3. "I know. Kowalski's been short-staffed all week." "I'm going to fix the staffing model," Megan said. "It's going to take about 60 days, and it's not going to be comfortable." Ortega looked at her for a moment. Then she got herself coffee and came back and stood at the station beside her. "Tell me where to start." Outside the window, the mountains were white-capped and enormous, and indifferent in the way mountains are indifferent. Not hostile, just vast, uninterested in the small, urgent human concerns of the building below them. The sun was coming up over the eastern edge of the city, the sky doing the early morning thing it did before the blue settled in, all the colors too pale and too clear at once. Megan looked at the charts, at the names, at the numbers that told her who was stable and who wasn't, and what needed doing and in what order. She got to work.